Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. Chapter 4 At Flourish and Blotts. Life on the Burrow was as extraordinary as viable from lifestyles on Privet. Pressure. The Dursleys preferred the whole lot neat and ordered. The Weasley's residence burst with the peculiar and surprising. Harry were given a surprise. The first time he appeared in the replicate over the kitchen mantelpiece and it shouted, "Tuck your shirt in, Scruffy." The ghoul inside the attic howled and dropped pipes whenever he felt matters had been getting too quiet and small. Explosions from Fred and George's bedroom had been considered perfectly normal. What Harry found maximum unusual about existence at Ron's, but, wasn't the speaking mirror or the clanking ghoul, it was the truth that everybody there regarded to like him. Mrs. Weasley fussed over the country of his socks and attempted to force him to consume fourth helpings at every meal. Mr. Weasley liked Harry to sit next to him at the dinner table so that he ought to bombard him with questions about lifestyles with muggles, asking him to explain how things like plugs and the postal carrier labored. Captivating, he would say as Harry talked him via the usage of a phone. Imaginative, really, what number of approaches muggles have located of getting along without magic. Harry heard from Hogwarts one sunny morning approximately every week after he had arrived at the Burrow. He and Ron went all the way down to breakfast to locate Mr. and Mrs. Weasley and Ginny already sitting at the kitchen table. The second she saw Harry, Ginny by accident knocked her porridge bowl to the floor with a noisy clatter. Ginny regarded very at risk of knocking matters over whenever Harry entered a room. She dived underneath the desk to retrieve the bowl and emerged with her face glowing like the setting solar. Pretending he hadn't observed this, Harry sat down and took the toast Mrs. Weasley offered him. "Letters from faculty," said Mr. Weasley, passing Harry and Ron equal envelopes of yellowish parchment, addressed in inexperienced ink. "Dumbledore already knows you're right here, Harry, doesn't leave out a trick, that guy." "UVE got them, too," he introduced, as Fred and George ambled in, nevertheless, of their pajamas. For a couple of minutes there has been silence as they all examine their letters. Harry's advised him to trap the Hogwarts Express as ordinary from King's Pass Station on September 1st. There was additionally a listing of the brand new books he'd want for the approaching year. Second-year college students will require the usual Book of Spells, Grade 2 via Miranda Goshawk. Damage with a Banshee by using Gilderoy Lockhart. Gaddying with Ghouls with the aid of Gilderoy Lockhart. Holidays with Hags through Gilderoy Lockhart. Travels with Trolls by way of Gilderoy Lockhart. Voyages with Vampires through Gilderoy Lockhart. Wanderings with Werewolves by Gilderoy Lockhart. 12 Months with the Yeti by using Gilderoy Lockhart. Fred, who had finished his personal listing, peered over at Harry's. "You've been advised to get all Lockhart's books, too," he said. "The new Defense in Opposition to the Darkish Arts instructor have to be a fan, bet it's a witch." At this point, Fred caught his mom's eye and quick busied himself with the marmalade. "That lot received come reasonably priced," stated George, with a quick observe his parents. "Lockhart's books are in reality steeply priced." "Well, we'll manage," stated Mrs. Weasley, but she looked involved. "I anticipate we'll be capable of select up lots of Ginny's matters second-hand." "Oh, are you beginning at Hogwarts this year?" Harry asked Ginny. She nodded, blushing to the roots of her flaming hair, and positioned her elbow inside the butter dish. Fortunately no person noticed this besides Harry, because just then Ron's elder brother Percy walked in. He became already dressed, his Hogwarts prefect badge pinned to his sweater vest. "Morning, all," stated Percy rapidly. "Cute day." He sat down within the most effective last chair, however leapt up once more, almost without delay, pulling from below him a molting, grey feather duster. At least, that was what Harry thought it changed into, till he saw that it was respiration. Errol, stated Ron, taking the limp bell from Percy and extracting a letter from beneath its wing. Eventually, he's were given Hermione's answer. I wrote to her pronouncing, we were going to try and rescue you from the Dursleys. He carried Errol to a perch simply inside the lower back door and tried to face him on it, but Errol flopped directly off once more, so Ron laid him at the draining board as an alternative, muttering, pathetic. Then he ripped open Hermione's letter and read it out loud. Pricey Ron, and Harry, if you're there, I hope the whole thing went all proper and that Harry is okay and which you didn't do something illegal to get him out, Ron, because that could get Harry into problem, too. I've been virtually involved, and if Harry is all proper, will you please allow me understand at once? However, perhaps it might be better in case you used a different owl, because I think any other delivery may endure one off. I'm very busy with schoolwork, of course, how can she be, said Ron in horror. We're on holiday. And we're going to London next Wednesday to shop for my new books. Why don't we meet in Diagon Alley? Allow me recognize what's occurring as soon as you could. Love from Hermione. Well, that fits in nicely. We are able to go and get all your matters then, too, stated Mrs. Weasley, starting to clear the desk. What are you all up to today? Harry, Ron, Fred, and George were making plans to go up the hill to a small paddock the Weasleys owned. It was surrounded through bushes that blocked it from view of the village under, which means that they may exercise Quidditch there, as long as they didn't fly too excessive. They couldn't use real Quidditch balls, which were difficult to provide an explanation for if they had escaped and flown away over the village. As a substitute, they threw apples for one some other to seize. They took turns driving Harry's Nimbus 1000, which became without problems the exceptional broom. Ron's antique shooting celebrity was frequently outstripped through passing butterflies. 5 minutes later, they have been marching up the hill, broomsticks over their shoulders. That they had asked Percy if he desired to enroll in them, but he had stated he was busy. Harry had handiest visible Percy at mealtimes up to now. He stayed close in his room the rest of the time. Wish I knew what he was as much as, said Fred, frowning. He's no longer himself. His exam outcomes got here the day before you did, 12 OWLS, and he infrequently gloated at all. Everyday wizarding levels, George defined, seeing Harry's perplexed look. Bill were given 12, too. If we're now not cautious, we'll have another head boy in the own family. I don't think I should stand the shame. Bill became the oldest Weasley brother. He and the next brother, Charlie, had already left Hogwarts. Harry had by no means met both of them, but knew that Charlie was in Romania analyzing dragons and invoice in Egypt running for the Wizards' Bank, Gringotts. Dunno how mothers and fathers are going to have enough money all our school stuff this 12 months, stated George after a while. 5 sets of Lockhart books. And Ginny needs robes and a wand and the whole lot. Harry stated not anything. He felt a piece awkward. Saved in an underground vault at Gringotts in London became a small fortune that his dad and mom had left him. Of direction, it became only within the wizarding global that he had money. You couldn't use galleons, sickles, and nuts in Muggle stores. He had never noted his Gringotts financial institution account to the Dursleys. He didn't assume their horror of anything related with magic could stretch to a massive pile of gold. Mrs. Weasley woke them all early the following Wednesday. After a brief half of a dozen Francis Bacon sandwiches each, they pulled on their coats and Mrs. Weasley took a flower pot off the kitchen mantelpiece and peered internal. We're walking low, Arthur, she sighed. We'll have to shop for some greater These days. All properly, guests first. After you, Harry dear. And she or he supplied him the flower pot. Harry stared at them all watching him. What am I speculated to do, he stammered. He's by no means travelled via flu powder, said Ron suddenly. Sorry, Harry, I forgot. In no way, said Mr. Weasley. However, how did you get to Diagon Alley too? Purchase your faculty things ultimate 12 months. I went on the underground. Definitely, stated Mr. Weasley eagerly. Had been there escapateurs? How? Exactly. No longer now, Arthur, said Mrs. Weasley. Flu powder's loads faster, dear, but goodness me, if you've never used it before. He'll be all proper, Mum, said Fred. Harry, watch us first. He took a pinch of glittering powder out of the flower pot, stepped up to the fireplace, and threw the powder into the flames. With a roar, the fireplace grew to become emerald green and rose better than Fred, who stepped right into it, shouted, Diagon Alley, and vanished. You must talk absolutely, dear, Mrs. Weasley advised Harry as George dipped his hand into the flower pot. And be sure to get out on the right. Great. The right what? Said Harry nervously as the fire roared and whipped George out of sight, too. Nicely, there are an awful lot of wizard fires to pick from, but so long as you've spoken without a doubt. He'll be best, Molly, don't fuss, stated Mr. Weasley, supporting himself too. Flu powder, too. However, pricey, if he were given misplaced, how might we ever provide an explanation for to his aunt and uncle? They wouldn't mind, Harry reassured her. Dudley could assume it was an incredible shaggy dog story if I were given lost up a chimney, don't worry about that. Nicely, all right, you go after Arthur, stated Mrs. Weasley. Now, while you get into the fire, say wherein you're going. And hold your elbows tucked in, Ron counseled. And your eyes close, said Mrs. Weasley. The soot. Don't fidget, said Ron. Or you might nicely fall out of the wrong fireplace. But don't panic and get out too early, wait till you spot Fred and George. Attempting tough to endure all this in thoughts, Harry took a pinch of flu powder and walked to the edge of the fireplace. He took a deep breath, scattered the powder into the flames, and stepped forward. The hearth felt like a warm breeze. He opened his mouth and right away swallowed a variety of warm ash. Diagon Alley, he coughed. It felt as even though he had been being sucked down a massive drain. He seemed to be spinning very rapid, the roaring in his ears was deafening. He attempted to hold his eyes open, however the whirl of inexperienced flames made him experience sick. Something hard knocked his elbow, and he tucked it in tightly, nonetheless. Spinning and spinning, now it felt as though bloodless fingers were slapping his face. Squinting via his glasses, he saw a blurred movement of fireplaces and snatched glimpses of the rooms past his barren Verlam. Sandwiches were turning interior him. He closed his eyes, once more wishing it'd stop, and then he fell, face forward, onto cold stone and felt the bridge of his glasses snap. Dizzy and bruised, blanketed in soot, he got gingerly to his toes, holding his broken glasses up to his eyes. He changed into quite alone, but where he changed into, he had no concept. All he could inform was that he became standing within the stone hearth of what gave the look of a big, dimly lit wizard's save. However, not anything in right here was ever probable to be on a Hogwarts school listing. A glass case nearby held a withered hand on a cushion, a blood-stained PC of cards, and a staring glass eye. Evil-searching mask stared down from the walls. An assortment of human bones lay upon the counter, and rusty, spiked units hung from the ceiling. Even worse, the darkish, slender avenue Harry may want to see via the dusty shop window was actually no longer Diagon Alley. The earlier he got out of here, the better. Nostril still stinging wherein it had hit the hearth, Harry made his way unexpectedly and silently closer to the door. However, earlier than he'd got halfway towards it, people regarded on the opposite facet of the glass, and considered one of them turned into the very last character Harry wanted to fulfill whilst he was lost, included in soot and sporting broken glasses. Draco Malfoy. Harry regarded quick round and spotted a massive black cupboard to his left. He shot internal it and pulled the doorways closed, leaving a small crack to peer via. Seconds later, a bell clanged, and Malfoy stepped into the save. The man who observed should most effective be Draco's father. He had the equal light, pointed face and equal bloodless, grey eyes. Mr. Malfoy crossed the store, looking lazily at the objects on display, and rang a bell on the counter. Earlier than turning to his son and announcing, "Contact not anything, Draco." Malfoy, who had reached for the glass eye, said, "I notion you were going to shop for me a present." "I said I would buy you a racing broom," stated his father, drumming his arms at the counter. "What's the good of that if I'm now not on the house crew?" said Malfoy, looking sulky and terrible-tempered. Harry Potter got a Nimbus 2000 closing year special permission from Dumbledore so he could play for Gryffindor. He's now not even that accurate, it's simply because he's well known for having a stupid scar on his brow. Malfoy bent down to study a shelf full of skulls. All and sundry thinks he's so smart, top-notch Potter together with his scar and his broomstick. "You've got informed me this at least a dozen instances already," said Mr. Malfoy, with a quelling examine his son. "And I'd remind you that it isn't prudent to seem less than keen on Harry Potter, no longer whilst most of our kind regard him as the hero who made the Dark Lord disappear." "Ah, Mr. Borgin." A stooping guy had regarded in the back of the counter, smoothing his greasy hair returned from his face. "Mr. Malfoy, what a delight to see you again," stated Mr. Borgin in a voice as oily as his hair. Overjoyed, and younger grasped Malfoy, too. "Charmed. How might also I be of assistance?" "I should show you, just in today, and very reasonably priced." "I'm no longer buying these days, Mr. Borgin, however promoting," stated Mr. Malfoy. "Promoting?" The smile diminished slightly from Mr. Borgin's face. "You have heard, of Path, that the Ministry is accomplishing more raids," said Mr. Malfoy, taking a roll of parchment from his inside pocket and unraveling it for Mr. Borgin to read. "I've some, gadgets at domestic that might embarrass me, if the Ministry were to name." Mr. Borgin constant a couple of pince-nez to his nostril and seemed down the listing. "The Ministry wouldn't presume to trouble you, sir, without a doubt?" Mr. Malfoy's lip curled. "I've not been visited but the call Malfoy still commands a certain admire, but the Ministry grows ever greater meddlesome. There are rumors about a brand new Muggle Protection Act. No question that flea-bitten, Muggle-loving fool Arthur Weasley is at the back of it." Harry felt a warm surge of anger. "And as you notice, certain of these poisons would possibly make it appear." "I understand, sir, of course," said Mr. Borgin. "Permit me see." "Can I have that?" interrupted Draco, pointing on the withered hand on its cushion. "Ah. The Hand of Glory," stated Mr. Borgin, abandoning Mr. Malfoy's list and scurrying over to Draco. "Insert a candle and it offers mild best to the holder. Satisfactory pal of thieves and plunderers. Your son has high-quality taste, sir." "I hope my son will quantity to extra than a thief or a plunderer, Borgin," said Mr. Malfoy coldly, and Mr. Borgin stated quick, "No offense, sir, no offense supposed." "Although if his grades don't pick up," said Mr. Malfoy, extra coldly still, "which can certainly be all he's in shape for." "It's not my fault," retorted Draco. "The academics all have favorites, that Hermione Granger. I might have idea you'd be ashamed that a girl of no wizard circle of relatives beat you in every exam," snapped Mr. Malfoy. Ha, said Harry under his breath, pleased to see Draco searching each. Abashed and irritated. It's the same throughout, said Mr. Borgin, in his oily voice. Wizard. Blood is counting for much less everywhere. Not with me, said Mr. Malfoy, his long nostrils flaring. No, sir, nor with me, sir, said Mr. Borgin, with a deep bow. In that case, possibly we are able to go back to my listing, said Mr. Malfoy quickly. I am in something of a hurry, Borgin, I have vital commercial enterprise. Some other place these days. They commenced to haggle. Harry watched nervously as Draco drew closer and nearer to his hiding location, inspecting the objects on the market. Draco paused to take a look at a protracted coil of hangman's rope and to read, smirking, the card propped on a brilliant necklace of opals. Caution, do not contact. Cursed, has claimed the lives of 19 Muggle owners so far. Draco grew to become away and noticed the cabinet right in the front of him. He walked ahead. He stretched out his hand for the manage. Performed, stated Mr. Malfoy on the counter. Come, Draco. Harry wiped his brow on his sleeve as Draco turned away. Top day to you, Mr. Borgin. I'll count on you on the manor the following day too. Pick out up the products. The instant the door had closed, Mr. Borgin dropped his oily manner. Properly day yourself, Mr. Malfoy, and if the stories are genuine, you haven't bought me half of what's hidden in your manor. Muttering darkly, Mr. Borgin disappeared right into a back room. Harry waited for a minute in case he got here back, then, quietly as he ought to, slipped out of the cabinet, past the glass cases, and out of the shop door. Clutching his damaged glasses to his face, Harry stared around. He had emerged into a dingy alleyway that regarded to be made up totally of stores committed to the darkish arts. The only he'd simply left, Borgin and Burke's, looked like the most important, but contrary was an unpleasant window show of shrunken heads and, 2 doors down, a massive cage became alive with colossal black spiders. 2 shabby-looking wizards had been watching him from the shadow of a doorway, muttering to every different. Feeling jumpy, Harry set off, trying to maintain his glasses on instantly and hoping in opposition to hope he'd be able to discover a manor out of here. An vintage wooden street signal, striking over a store selling toxic candles, advised him he turned into a nocturne alley. This didn't assist, as Harry had by no means heard of such an area. He meant he hadn't spoken honestly enough. Via his mouthful of ashes lower back in the Weasley's hearth. Seeking to stay calm, he questioned what to do. Not lost are you, my pricey, said a voice in his ear, making him soar. An aged witch stood in front of him, preserving a tray of what appeared horribly like complete human fingernails. She leered at him, displaying mossy enamel. Harry sponsored away. I'm nice, thank you, he said. I'm just Harry. What do ya assume you're doing down there? Harry's coronary heart leapt. So did the witch. A load of fingernails cascaded down over her FT, and she cursed as the massive form of Hagrid, the Hogwarts gamekeeper, came striding closer to them, beetle-black eyes flashing over his exquisite bristling beard. Hagrid. Harry croaked in comfort. I used to be misplaced, flew powder. Hagrid seized Harry through the scruff of the neck and pulled him far away from the witch, knocking the tray proper out of her palms. Her shrieks followed them all the way alongside the twisting alleyway out into brilliant daylight. Harry saw a quainted, snow-white marble building inside the distance. Gringotts Financial Institution. Hagrid had urged him proper into Diagon Alley. You're a multitude, stated Hagrid gruffly, brushing soot off Harry so forcefully, he almost knocked him right into a barrel of dragon dung. Outdoor and apothecary. Skulkin' around Nocturne Alley, I dunno, dodgy region, Harry, Don. Want no one ter see ya down there. I realized that, said Harry, ducking as Hagrid made to comb him off. Once more. I told you, I used to be lost. What were you doing down there, anyway? I used to be lookin' for a flesh-eatin' slug repellent, growled Hagrid. They're ruinin' the school cabbages. You're no longer on your personal? I'm staying with the Weasleys, however we were given separated, Harry defined. I've got to move and discover them. They activate collectively down the road. How come? Yeah, by no means, wrote back Termy, stated Hagrid as Harry jogged along him. He had to take 3 steps to every stride of Hagrid's huge boots. Harry defined all about Dobby and the Dursleys. Lousy muggles, growled Hagrid. If IDVE recognized. Harry! Harry! Over here! Harry looked up and noticed Hermione Granger's status at the pinnacle of the white flight of steps to Gringotts. She ran down to satisfy them, her bushy, brown hair flying at the back of her. What took place in your glasses? What's up, Hagrid? Oh, it's splendid too. See you again. Are you getting into Gringotts, Harry? As quickly as I've located the Weasleys, stated Harry. Yet gain't have lengthy ter wait, Hagrid said with a smile. Harry and Hermione regarded round, sprinting up the crowded road. Were Ron, Fred, George, Percy, and Mr. Weasley. Harry, Mr. Weasley panted. We was hoping you'd simplest gone one great too. Far. He mopped his glistening bald patch. Molly's frantic, she's coming now. Wherein did you return out? Ron requested. Nocturne Alley, stated Hagrid grimly. First rate, stated Fred and George together. We've in no way been allowed in, said Ron enviously. I have to ready, well think not, growled Hagrid. Mrs. Weasley now came galloping into view, her handbag swinging wildly in one hand, Ginny just clinging on to the alternative. Oh, Harry, oh, my expensive, you could have been anywhere. Gasping for breath, she pulled a mass of garments brush out of her bag and started out sweeping off the soot Hagrid hadn't controlled to beat away. Mr. Weasley took Harry's glasses, gave them a faucet of his wand, and back them, proper as new. Nicely, gotta be off, stated Hagrid, who changed into having his hand wrung by using Mrs. Weasley, Nocturne Alley. In case you hadn't located him, Hagrid. See, you're at Hogwarts. And he strode away, head and shoulders taller than all of us else in the packed street. Wager who I saw in Borgin and Burke's? Harry requested Ron and Hermione as they climbed the Gringotts steps. Malfoy and his father. Did Lucius Malfoy purchase something? Said Mr. Weasley sharply in the back of them. No, he changed into selling. So he's worried, said Mr. Weasley with grim satisfaction. Oh, I'd love to get Lucius Malfoy for something. You be cautious, Arthur, stated Mrs. Weasley sharply as they were bowed into the financial institution by using a goblin on the door. That own family's trouble. Don't go biting off more than you can chunk. So that you don't suppose I'm a healthy for Lucius Malfoy, said Mr. Weasley, indignantly. However, he turned into distracted almost right now, by way of the sight of Hermione's dad and mom, who were status nervously at the counter that ran all along the splendid marble hall, looking ahead to Hermione to introduce them. But you're muggles, stated Mr. Weasley delightedly. We should have a drink. What's that you've got there? Oh, you're changing muggle money. Molly, look. He pointed excitedly at the 10-pound notes in Mr. Granger's hand. Meet you returned here, Ron said to Hermione as the Weasleys and Harry were led off to their underground vaults via some other Gringotts goblin. The vaults have been reached with the aid of small, goblin-driven carts that sped along miniature train tracks via the financial institution's underground tunnels. Harry loved the breakneck adventure down to the Weasleys' vault, however felt dreadful, some distance worse than he had in Nocturne Alley, when it turned into opened. There has been a totally small pile of silver sickles interior, and just one gold galleon. Mrs. Weasley felt right into the corners before sweeping the whole lot into her bag. Harry felt even worse once they reached his vault. He tried to dam the contents from view as he hastily shoved handfuls of cash right into a leather bag. Lower back outdoor on the marble steps, all of them separated. Percy muttered, vaguely approximately needing a brand new quill. Fred and George had noticed their pal from Hogwarts, Lee Jordan. Mrs. Weasley and Ginny had been going to a second-hand gown store. Mr. Weasley changed into insisting on taking the Grangers off to the Leaky Cauldron for a drink. We'll all meet at Flourish and Blotts in an hour to shop for your schoolbooks, said Mrs. Weasley, setting off with Ginny. And not one step down Diagon Alley, she shouted at the twins' retreating backs. Harry, Ron, and Hermione strolled off along the winding, cobbled road. The bag of gold, silver, and bronze jangling cheerfully in Harry's pocket. Changed into clamoring to be spent, so he sold 3 massive strawberry and peanut butter ice lotions, which they slurped thankfully as they wandered up the alley, inspecting the captivating, keep home windows. Ron gazed longingly at a complete set of Chudley cannon gowns within the home windows of exceptional Quidditch supplies till Hermione dragged them off to buy ink and parchment subsequent door. In Gamble and Jape's Wizarding Comic Story Keep, they met Fred, George, and Lee Jordan, who had been stocking up on Dr. Filibuster's suitable wet start, no warmth fireworks, and in a tiny junk keep complete of broken wands, lopsided brass scales, and old cloaks included in potion stains, they determined. Percy, deeply immersed in a small and deeply uninteresting e-book called Prefects, Who Gained Power. I take a look at of Hogwarts prefects and their later careers, Ron read aloud. Off the again cover. That sounds charming. Go away, Percy snapped. Direction, he's very formidable, Percy, he's got it all deliberate out. He wants to be Minister of Magic, Ron told Harry and Hermione in an undertone as they left Percy to it. An hour later, they headed for Flourish and Blotts. They were through no manner the only ones making their way to the bookstore. As they approached it, they noticed to their surprise a large crowd jostling outside the doorways, looking to get in. The reason for this was proclaimed through a massive banner stretched throughout the higher home windows. Gilderoy Lockhart could be signing copies of his autobiography. Magical Me. Nowadays, 12:30 p.m. to 4:30 p.m. we are able to certainly meet him. Hermione squealed. I imply, he's written nearly the whole book list. The group appeared to be made up normally of witches round Mrs. Weasley's age. A pressured searching wizard stood at the door, announcing, frivolously, please, girls. Don't push, there, thoughts the books, now. Harry, Ron, and Hermione squeezed inner. An extended line wound proper to the lower back of the store, where Gilderoy Lockhart becomes signing his books. They each grabbed a duplicate of the Standard Book of Spells, Grade 2, and sneaked up the line to in which the rest of the Weasleys were status with Mr. and Mrs. Granger. Oh, there you're, desirable, said Mrs. Weasley. She sounded breathless. And stored patting her hair, we'll be capable of see him in a minute. Gilderoy Lockhart got here slowly into view, seated at a table surrounded through big pics of his very own face, all winking and flashing dazzlingly white enamel at the gang. The real Lockhart turned into wearing robes of forget-me-now, not blue that precisely matched his eyes, his pointed wizard's hat turned into set at a jaunty perspective on his wavy hair. A brief, irritable-looking man become dancing round taking pics with a massive black digital camera that emitted puffs of pink smoke with every blinding flash. Out of the manor, there, he twisted up at Ron, moving returned to get a higher shot. This is for the Daily Prophet. Massive deal, said Ron, rubbing his foot wherein the photographer had stepped on it. Gilderoy Lockhart heard him. He looked up. He saw Ron, and then he noticed Harry. He stared. Then he leapt to his FT and definitely shouted, It can't be Harry Potter? The group parted, whispering excitedly. Lockhart dived forward, seized Harry's arm, and pulled him to the front. The group burst into applause. Harry's face burned as Lockhart shook his hand for the photographer, who became clicking away madly, wafting thick smoke over the Weasleys. Best huge smile, Harry, stated Lockhart, through his personal gleaming enamel. Together, you and that I are worth the front web page. Whilst he finally let go of Harry's hand, Harry should hardly experience his fingers. He tried to sidle back over to the Weasleys, however Lockhart threw an arm around his shoulders and clamped him tightly to his aspect. Ladies and gentlemen, he stated loudly, waving for quiet. What an fantastic second this is. The ideal second for me to make a bit declaration I've been sitting on for a while. When young Harry here stepped into Flourish and Blotts nowadays, he handiest wanted to buy my autobiography, which I will be glad to provide him. Now, free of fee, the crowd applauded again. He had no concept. Lockhart persisted, giving Harry a little shake that made his glasses slip to the stop of his nose, that he would rapidly be getting much, a whole lot more than my book, Magical Me. He and his schoolmates will, in truth, be getting the actual Magical Me. Sure, girls and gentlemen, I have first-rate satisfaction and pleasure in saying that this September, I might be taking over the post of protection in opposition to the darkish arts instructor at Hogwarts Faculty of Witchcraft and Wizardry. The crowd cheered and clapped, and Harry determined himself being supplied with the complete works of Gilderoy Lockhart. Magnificent barely below their weight, he controlled to make his way out of the limelight to the fringe of the room, wherein Ginny changed into status subsequent to her new cauldron. You've got those, Harry mumbled to her, tipping the books into the cauldron. I'll purchase my own. Guess you cherished that, didn't you, Potter? Stated a voice Harry had no trouble recognizing. He straightened up and observed himself face to face with Draco Malfoy, who changed into wearing his regular sneer. Famous Harry Potter, stated Malfoy. Can't even pass right into a bookstore without making the front page. Go away, him alone, he didn't want all that, stated Ginny. It turned into the first time she had spoken in the front of Harry. She become obtrusive at Malfoy. Potter, you've got yourself a female friend, drawled Malfoy. Ginny went scarlet as Ron and Hermione fought their manner over, both clutching stacks of Lockhart's books. Oh, it's you, said Ron, searching at Malfoy as though he had been something ugly on the only of his shoe. Wager you're surprised to look Harry here, eh? Now not as surprised as I'm to look you in a store, Weasley retorted Malfoy. I suppose your mother and father will cross hungry for a month to pay for all the ones. Ron went as crimson as Ginny. He dropped his books into the cauldron, too, and started out towards Malfoy, but Harry and Hermione grabbed the again of his jacket. Ron, said Mr. Weasley, struggling over with Fred and George. What are you doing? It's too crowded in right here, permits go out of doors. Well, properly, well, Arthur Weasley. It become Mr. Malfoy. He stood together with his hand on Draco's shoulder, sneering. In only the same manner, Lucius, stated Mr. Weasley, nodding coldly. Busy time on the ministry, I listen, stated Mr. Malfoy. All those raids, I'm hoping they're paying you overtime? He reached into Ginny's cauldron and extracted, from amid the sleek Lockhart books, a completely antique, very battered replica of a newbie's manual to Transfiguration. Obviously no longer, Mr. Malfoy said. Pricey me, what's using being a shame to the call of wizard in the event that they don't even pay you nicely for it? Mr. Weasley flushed darker than both Ron or Ginny. We've got a completely distinctive idea of what disgraces the call of wizard, Malfoy, he said. Truly, stated Mr. Malfoy, his pale eyes straying to Mr. and Mrs. Granger, who had been watching apprehensively. The agency you maintain, Weasley, And that I notion your circle of relatives could sink no lower. There has been a thud of metal as Ginny's cauldron went flying. Mr. Weasley had thrown himself at Mr. Malfoy, knocking him backward into a bookshelf. Dozens of heavy spellbooks came thundering down on all their heads. There was a yell of, "Get him, Dad," from Fred or George. Mrs. Weasley became shrieking, "No, Arthur, no." The gang stampeded backward, knocking extra shelves over. "Gentlemen, please, please," cried the assistant, and then, louder than all, "Damage it up, there, gents, smash it up." Hagrid changed into wading towards them through the ocean of books. In an instantaneous, he had pulled Mr. Weasley and Mr. Malfoy apart. Mr. Weasley had a reduced lip, and Mr. Malfoy had been hit in the attention via an encyclopedia of toadstools. He became still preserving Ginny's antique Transfiguration e-book. He thrust it at her, his eyes glittering with malice. "Here, lady, take your book, it's the nice your father can provide you with." Pulling himself out of Hagrid's grip, he beckoned to Draco and swept from the store. "Yeah, ought to be unnoticed him, Arthur," said Hagrid, nearly lifting Mr. Weasley off his FT as he straightened his robes. "Rotten to the core, the whole circle of relatives, everyone knows that, no Malfoy's worth listenin' ter. Terrible blood, that's what it's Miles, come on now, let's get outta here." The assistant appeared as though he wanted to stop them leaving, but he slightly came up to Hagrid's waist and seemed to think better of it. They moved quickly up the street, the Grangers shaking with fright and Mrs. Weasley beside herself with fury. "A great example to set on your youngsters, brawling in public, what? Gilderoy Lockhart ought to be idea." "He become thrilled," said Fred. "Didn't you pay attention him as we have been leaving? He turned into asking that bloke from the Day-by-Day Prophet if he'd be able to work. The fight into his report said it become all exposure." However, it changed into a subdued group that headed lower back to the fireplace in the leaky cauldron where Harry, the Weasleys, and all their purchasing might be visiting back to the burrow the usage of flu powder. They stated 6K44B5BB0 at 8 Dec 5315A8A4CCFBC to the Grangers, who had been leaving the pub for the Muggle Road on the alternative aspect. Mr. Weasley started out to invite them how bus stops work, but stopped quickly on the look on Mrs. Weasley's face. Harry took off his glasses and positioned them adequately in his pocket before supporting himself to flu powder. It truly wasn't his favored manner to tour